meeting at approximately 10:15 a.m. I am John Cora, the hearing officer at docket 18-3102, a Water Quality Division rule package concerning Chapter 1 of their rules. This meeting is being held in room 1699 of the Hirschler Building, 122 West 25th Street, Cheyenne, Wyoming. Present today from the council are Megan Lawley, Jim Flitner, Nick Agopian, Deb Balmer, myself, and by phone, Rich Fairservice and Dr. Dave Bagley. Staff present today for the council are Jim Ruby, Joe Girardin, and Ryan Shelloff. At this time, let's get started. If the representatives from the Water Quality Division would give us an opening on this rule package. And as you do, would you please identify yourselves for the recorder before you start? Mr. Frederick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. Kevin Frederick, Water Quality Administrator. Today with me, I have Lindsay Patterson. She'll be assisting with the presentation that we'll be giving you shortly. Lindsay is the supervisor of the Water Quality Standards section of the Water Quality Division. Behind me is Director Parfit. Next to Director Parfit is David Waterstreet. David is the section manager for the watersheds section. It includes water quality standards, including Lindsay. Lindsay reports to David. Next to David is Kelly Shaw. Ms. Kelly Shaw is the Assistant Attorney General and works very closely with DEQ and the Water Quality Division. And also in the back of the audience today, we have Mr. Bill Dorenzo. Mr. Dorenzo is our WQD's or Surface Water Discharge Permitting Section Supervisor. And with that, I would like to just brief the council a little bit on the purpose of the proposed rule change that we're going to discuss with you today regarding Chapter 1. The Wyoming DEQ Water Quality Division is proposing to add language to the Water Quality Rules and Regulations, Chapter 1, Wyoming Surface Water Quality Standards, to allow the administrator to grant temporary modifications to a designated use and water quality criteria in circumstances where meeting a water quality-based effluent limit for ammonia and/or nutrients, specifically nitrogen and phosphorus, would result in substantial and widespread social and economic impacts or economic hardship. In other words, in circumstances where it's not economically feasible to meet a water quality-based effluent limit for ammonia and/or nutrients, DEQ may allow the permittee additional time to meet the effluent limit. With that, I'll turn this over to Lindsay, and Lindsay will provide you some more background on the contents of the rule changes, and following her presentation, we'll certainly be available to take questions and comments from the council. And we will also, at that time, address comments that we have received in the past few days from the Environmental Protection Agency on proposed changes in the Wyoming Outdoor Council. So with that, Lindsay.
Thank you, Kevin. As Kevin mentioned, my name is Lindsay Patterson. I'm the supervisor of the Water Quality Standards Program, and I'm happy to be presenting the proposed rules, proposed changes to Chapter 1 that will allow us to grant dischargers specific variants. So I did prepare a brief presentation, walk you through some of the basic background on surface water quality standards, because that sets the stage for why we want to do the proposed rule. I'll walk through a few of the details of what's included in the proposed rule, and then, as Kevin mentioned, we'll walk through the comments that we received most recently on the package, and then the changes that we made to the proposed rule that resulted from those comments. So I think one of the easiest ways to think about surface water quality standards is comprised of three main parts. They have designated uses. These are the goals that we have for our water bodies, things like recreation, drinking water, fisheries, and then we have water quality criteria. to support those designated uses. We have anti-degradation provisions, which are intended to maintain water quality when it's better than the criteria that we have to protect the uses. So a little bit more about water quality criteria. These are the concentrations of pollutants or narrative conditions that we want to protect those uses that we set for the water bodies. But when they're derived, they don't take into consideration the cost or the feasibility of meeting the criteria. So when we go to use the criteria to implement them into a point source permit, that can potentially create issues for the dischargers because they become the basis of what's called a water quality-based effluent limit. The calculation for a water quality-based effluent limit also takes into consideration the critical low flow of the stream, the background concentration of the pollutant in the receiving water, and also how much flow they're discharging. So there's some other things that factor into it, but the water quality criteria really drive that. So currently, the standards and the permitting program have a couple different options that you can utilize if a permittee can't meet a water quality-based effluent limit. They could potentially go to the permitting program and ask them, are there some modifications that can be done to this calculation? Maybe the low flow is incorrect. Maybe we want to modify the permit so it's calculating monthly limits. Another option is for them to look at a compliance schedule. Compliance schedules typically last about 5 years, and they need to lay out the specific actions that the permittee will take in order to meet the effluent limit at the end of that about 1 year permit cycle. So it's not a great option in circumstances where they may not know whether they can ultimately meet the limit or they don't know the specific steps that they're going to take to come into compliance with the limit. Other options that we have is to come to the standards program and say, well, is this the appropriate designated use? Maybe we want to modify the criteria that applies to that surface water. Those may not always be the best option if the uses are appropriate or the criteria is appropriate, and it's just a matter of how long it's going to take them to meet those goals. In a lot of cases, we want to retain the goals that we have for our water bodies because they're appropriate. We want fish in the streams and we want to be able to swim there. It's just a matter of, okay, well, we recognize there might be financial constraints that would get us to that point. So this sort of came to the forefront more recently when we had a small municipality receive a waste load allocation from a total maximum daily load for ammonia. And this is a community of about 1,000 people. They have about 300 users that hook into their system. So the cost to potentially come into compliance from their upgrading their lagoon, they were looking at between $5 and $10 million in order to meet the ammonia effluent limit. And so we really wanted to look at this option of providing, additional time for them to come into compliance, since it would potentially create, an economic hardship on that community to have to lay out those costs, even if they're, taking out a loan for 20 years. It's still a lot for that small community to bear. The other thing, about the criteria is that ammonia limit is based on our existing ammonia standards. But in 2013, EPA released revised recommended ammonia criteria that are about half of our existing ammonia criteria. The ammonia criteria intended to protect fish and other aquatic species that can occur in streams, and so they become more stringent as they learn more about the sensitivity of aquatic organisms to these pollutants. The other thing we're working on is numeric nutrient criteria, and as Kevin mentioned, that's concentrations of nitrogen and phosphorus to protect our streams and reservoirs against excessive primary productivity or plant growth, and that can impact the use of the waters for swimming and drinking water. Fish and other aquatic life could potentially be impacted. Sometimes livestock can be impacted by nutrient pollution. So the other thing is that most of the wastewater facilities in Wyoming for municipalities are lagoons, and they weren't designed to treat to these low levels of nutrients or ammonia. And the cost to upgrade those facilities, I gave an example, $5 to $10 million. Sometimes it can be even more than that. And it just may not be affordable for them to, do that. And I think the other thing is important, that a lot of them may not have the wherewithal or the capabilities of hiring an operator and maintaining a really sophisticated wastewater treatment system that would be necessary to meet these stringent limits. So Wyoming's not alone, though. All these other states in the country are dealing with a similar issue where they have these wastewater lagoons, they have small communities. And so there's been a lot of interest nationally in this concept of variances, the topic of the proposed rule. And so states like Montana, they revised their statutes a handful of years ago in advance of adopting numeric nutrient criteria. Other states like Colorado have a variance authorizing provision within their water quality standards. They've been doing variances for ammonia and selenium. Wisconsin recently did a multi-discharger variance for phosphorus. Missouri and Kansas have been working on a multi-discharger variance for ammonia. And so we're kind of, slowly going along after these other states because you're limited in what options you have, because we want the criteria to protect the uses, but we also want to recognize that these facilities may need additional time to come into compliance. EPA also recognizes this issue when they most recently revised the federal regulations in 2015. They included a lot of details on variances because they recognize that this is one of the primary tools that states will be using to address these increasingly stringent water quality criteria. So a little bit of the details, Kevin mentioned some of these. The rule basically lays out that the administrator can grant a variance to the designated use and the water quality criteria for ammonia and nutrients. And we wanted to limit it at this point to just ammonia and nutrients because these are the pollutants that we anticipate municipalities will have the most difficult meeting. So the permittees will be required to, as part of receiving a variance, they have to do a comprehensive alternatives analysis. We really want them to evaluate all the different options that they potentially could utilize to meet the effluent limit. And then the other requirement is that they would have to demonstrate that the lowest cost of those alternatives would essentially result in economic hardship for them. I just use that shortened term. So the permittee is also going to be required to meet the high sustainable condition in the receiving water. So this is to ensure that you aren't just getting a pass from the standards. We know you can't get all the way there, but we want you to demonstrate what's the best that you can actually do because we want to be making progress towards meeting the underlying goals. And so this is really defined as the effluent limit that's closest to the water quality-based effluent limit that is feasible to achieve without causing economic hardship. And then the other details of how we would determine what the highest attainable condition is, it's really going to depend on what the communities or the entity's financial circumstances are at that point. What can they afford to do? What's the point at which it's not going to create economic hardship for them? And so that would be, some facilities may already be paying a lot for wastewater treatment, for example. And so they don't have additional money that they can devote to new technologies that maybe isn't going to get them all the way there, but would get them partly the way there. And then the other thing the rule lays out is that we would want all of the dischargers to develop a pollutant minimization program, which basically would outline specific things that the entity would do to minimize pollutant loadings, essentially maintaining the facility that they have, or if they put in a new facility, we want to make sure that it's being operated in a way that's going to maximize the reductions. So you may be wondering, how long would we grant these for? We had kind of toyed around with the idea of having, a maximum duration associated with that. The federal regulations don't specify a maximum duration, and so we essentially mirrored that in our rule. And so we want the duration is supposed to be as long as necessary for them to achieve the highest attainable condition. And so the highest attainable condition will essentially be a plan for them to get to the best point that they can, within a reasonable amount of time, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years. And so the duration would be based on that demonstration of the highest attainable condition. So then each variance is also required to be reevaluated every 5 years. This is something also that comes from the federal regulations. And the rule lays out that the discharger will be submitting information to us 180 days in advance of the permit renewal that we will use to then evaluate whether they were in compliance with the conditions of the variance. Did they do the pollutant minimization program things that they said they were going to do? Are they achieving, the effluent quality that we laid out in the variance? Are the conditions the same, or did the population change significantly? Did they, somehow come into a lot of money that would potentially modify like what we would think of as economically reasonable, or maybe the conditions have changed in that period of time. And then we would also want to look at that highest attainable condition and see whether that needs to be modified. Are they doing better than we thought they were going to do? And then this would be packaged together, and the public would be provided an opportunity to comment on it during the reevaluation. So I was just now going to walk through the comments that we received during the most recent comment period. The first one was from the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. They had provided comments during one of the earlier comment periods that was similar to this comment. They requested that there be an environmental analysis be completed to determine the potential impacts to aquatic resources. They also requested that there be monitoring requirements included as part of the variance so that they could see whether aquatic resources were being impacted due to the increase in the discharge of the pollutants. And so we provided a similar response to the previous comment that they had submitted. But really the goal is to improve water quality over time. And we even modify the rule during one of the revisions to explicitly state that you can't increase the discharge of the pollutant as a variance. So you wouldn't allow a new discharger to come on and get a variance. And then the other thing that's in the rule is that we could open up a reevaluation at any time. And so we really don't think it's necessary to monitor the aquatic resources, since ideally they would be getting better. The intention is to make conditions better. Game and Fish also commented that we should have a definition or sideboards for what constitutes substantial and widespread economic and social impacts. And we received a similar comment from the advisory board, and what we relayed to the advisory board is similar to what we had provided in response to Game and Fish. So that specific language is derived from the federal regulations. EPA doesn't define social and widespread or economic hardship for short. And so instead they developed this guidance in 1995 to provide states, with sort of some sideboards or some recommendations how you could potentially demonstrate economic hardship. But their guidance also lays out that it's not absolute decision points, and that there's other scientifically defensible ways that you can demonstrate economic hardship. And so we're working on developing guidance that would piggyback with EPA's guidance, and then also pull from the things that other states have done more recently to demonstrate economic hardship. EPA's guidance goes through different factors that you could potentially use, but they may not be great in all circumstances. So some states have gone through the process of developing these other indicators that can be helpful in demonstrating economic hardship. So the next comments are from EPA. So they recommended a change in the language in this section 37H, II, instead of saying interim effluent condition. They wanted to change to high attainable condition. And the main point with that is that it just needs to be more encompassing than just the effluent limit, because as a condition of the highest attainable condition, we require the permittee to develop a pollutant minimization program. And so we agreed that this seemed like a logical change, so we revised the rule between the version that we put out in December and what you guys have before you now. So another comment from EPA was that the highest attainable condition can only get more stringent during a reevaluation, and our rule didn't explicitly state that. And so we essentially have modified the rule so it should be clear that the reevaluation, if it determines that it's more stringent, that's okay. If the reevaluation determines that, well, we set the highest attainable condition too low, we need to go back and reestablish the variance from the get-go. So that those revisions have been made in this most recent version. So the other comment from EPA was specific to some language that we have to provide ourselves with an effective date for any variance that we would process. And the language states that the variance shall become effective either upon EPA approval or 90 days after submittal, whichever comes first. And so EPA wanted this taken out. But the timeframes come from the Clean Water Act. They provide 60 days for EPA to act to approve water quality standards submissions or 90 days to disapprove water quality standards submissions. This is restated in the federal regulations. The federal regulations also have a provision that basically says that EPA has to approve a water quality standard for it to become effective for Clean Water Act purposes. So it sort of sets up this odd dynamic where you would submit something to EPA. You kind of have to wait for them, but they're also bound by these timeframes, but they often don't meet these timeframes. And so it sets up a difficult position for the state to be in and for the discharger to be in when it's sort of in limbo, when the discharger has potentially done a lot of planning. They may have rate increases that they want to do. They may have grants that they've applied for, or loans that they've applied for that are sort of pending, in the mix, waiting for EPA to approve. And so we really thought it was important to retain some kind of effective date for the variance. And the language that we included is similar to what we have in other portions of the rule. When we submit changes to designated uses to EPA, we have that, 90-day effective date associated with it. But we also recognize that there's some concerns about these things going into automatic approval. Just if EPA doesn't act, we're just going to, implement it. And so we came up with this revised language during this most recent comment period that allows the EPA's regional administrator to request an extension from DEQ's director. And so this establishes a dialogue between EPA and the state so that, we're just certain aren't waiting and waiting and waiting. And then it allows the director to go and talk to the permittee and see what the potential implications would be if they were to be delayed. Is there something that we need more immediate action on, or are you guys okay to wait? I think it will also give our permitting program potentially more information on, at what point is this going to be acted on so that we know what to implement in terms of the permit. So the rule also identifies, what happens if EPA grants if we grant the extension to EPA, that essentially would become effective either at the expiration of that extension or upon EPA approval. So that's what I have.
Okay, well, thank you. Council members, any questions of the division? Yep, Mr. Pledner.
Just one quick one. You mentioned specifically nitrogen and phosphorus, so I'm assuming, and maybe wrongly, that some of these rule changes come from a need, but what specifically are this? I mean, are we talking about certain sources? I mean, do you have specific things that, just kind of, if you wouldn't mind filling me in on what those were, what kind of started this?
Sure. So specifically, ammonia, phosphorus, and nitrogen are common constituents within wastes that municipalities treat for, primarily in sewage. We recognize that they're in all likelihood going to be challenged with existing technologies and trying to achieve what we think look like future numeric standards or criteria for phosphorus and nitrogen removal from those waste streams. They exist not only within the mechanical treatment facilities that probably do a much better job in trying to reduce concentrations of ammonia, phosphorus, and nitrogen, but also in the smaller community lagoon type systems that don't rely as much upon mechanical treatment to knock those levels down. The effort is I think, been demonstrated that mechanical treatment systems in particular have some capabilities to what's referred to as optimization of the treatment plant, where you're actually tuning and adjusting and paying perhaps much closer attention to how your treatment process is actually working with respect to ammonia, phosphorus, and nitrogen. And the optimization process is something that seems to hold some very positive results for municipalities that have gone down that path. Typically, they engage with outside experts to help them understand some of the flexibilities they have in tuning their treatment system in order to reduce the discharge concentrations of those constituents. It's had some good success in some of the surrounding states. Montana has demonstrated some good results. Most recently, we've begun a pilot project on optimization with the city of Laramie, where an outside expert has been working directly with them at their consent and interest, and they've shown some fairly positive results as well, just in the relatively few months that they've begun to work on optimization. So there are some things that they can do going in that are going to help, definitely, and we certainly think that's a good step in the right direction initially.
So you believe basically that the technology exists out there, that these variations are just going to kind of give you a segue into getting this stuff fixed. It's just a matter of bringing these resources to bear on these situations, that it's not a situation that's unattainable and just variance after variance after variance. Actually, it's just a matter of putting the resources in play and giving us some time to deal with these issues that kind of overheaded.
Certainly. So optimization, facility optimization would be the first step. I think the smaller community lagoon systems are going to be a little bit more challenged. They haven't got quite as many options for turning buttons and dials that the mechanical treatment systems do. The affordability for the small communities with the lagoon systems is going to be much more of a challenge for them. So I think the approach that EPA recognizes through the variance process and supports in the Clean Water Act, and has been taken and applied in other states, is essentially a bridge that is going to help us get to the point where technology and affordability for these smaller lagoon systems that are going to be more challenged is going to become more realistic, but it'll take some time.
Anyone else?
Ms. Lally.
Yep.
I have a couple questions. Is the municipality, for example, not being held to the increased standard if they have applied for a waiver until the waiver's approved or not approved? In other words, if you found a municipality to be out of compliance with the ammonia standard, and they've applied for a waiver to do highest attainable use instead of the new EPA standard, they won't be penalized while they're waiting for that waiver, correct?
Madam Chair, members of the council, we would recognize that as part of an administrative process. Typically develops when a discharge permit is up for renewal. However, we can initiate an evaluation of an existing permit at any time and initiate that conversation with the municipality with respect to trying to engage in some sort of plan that gets them towards either the variance or the compliance. And I think the way we structured the process, we provide a reasonable amount of time and guidance with respect to assisting them in developing a variance process if that's what they're interested in trying to do. So no, we're more interested in trying to help those communities work into compliance rather than taking some sort of enforcement action that may not result in any positive outcomes. That's not to say that if communities rejected the opportunities to either take advantage of a variance or make modifications that would essentially bring their discharge effluent into permit limitations, we may be able to help encourage them a little bit to choose a path that we could help them take.
Okay. And if the EPA changes the standard again, will the variances have to be revisited, or will they hold even if the standard changes?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, we would need to redo the variance if the underlying standards would change.
Okay.
Yeah, so it would all be based on, because the original demonstration would be based on what it would require them to meet that effluent limit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Council, I have a couple of questions real quick. One is the process that you're going to use to determine economic hardship. What are the parameters? Are there a couple, three main parameters that you're going to require the applicant to respond to?
EPA, Madam Chairwoman and Council, the EPA's 95 guidance does outline a few general screening parameters that you could use. One of them is based on the median household income and the percentage of the median household income that is devoted towards treatment. And so they have recommended that anywhere between 1% and 2% you could potentially demonstrate economic hardship. And then anything above 2% typically would show hardship. But then they also have these secondary screening tests that you would go through that would look at the community's debts, how much tax revenue they're generating, essentially their ability to take on additional debts. You could look at their bond rating if they had that. You know, it's essentially like how good are they going to be at getting credit and repaying that credit if they needed to take out a loan. But other states have started to deviate from some of those factors that EPA has recommended because they may not work well in a really small community. One of the other factors they include is the unemployment rate. So there's a handful of these parameters that they recommend looking at.
All right, great. Thank you. The other is just and I'm probably reading the proposed rules in an incorrect manner, but on page 126, under section 37B, Romanet I, the ammonia and or nutrient water quality based effluent limit can be achieved by implementing technology based effluent limits under sections 301B and 306 of the Clean Water Act. Okay, I just answered my own question. When I went to 306 of our act, it talks about oil treater operations, and I just wanted to make sure we were clear. We're only talking about municipalities. Very good, thank you. Any other questions from the council? Yes. Ms. Lowry? Pardon?
Dave probably has some.
Oh, yes. For the gentleman on the phone, any questions of the division?
Yeah, this is Dave Bagley. Just a couple questions. I just wanted to confirm that as I look at the rule, the changes are in the definitions. There's been some definitions added, and that all of section 37 is new. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Then I wanted to ask, so we've got folks who've got permits, they've been discharging, and when they were issued their permits, they were fine and they've been meeting their permit, their discharge requirements, but they end up becoming out of compliance because the standard has been made more stringent. Is that what the issue is?
Yes, essentially what would need to happen if they were in compliance with their existing limit, we would potentially adopt a more stringent ammonia criteria or they could potentially receive a more stringent limit based on a total maximum daily load. Those would be developed for waters where it's been found that they're not meeting their water quality standards, and a restoration plan is then developed, and that would drive a more stringent effluent limit. So typically, they may get a more stringent limit from either of those two things happening.
Okay, but it's not due to any of their, they've been fine up to this point, right? Until some changes occur.
Right. It's typically not what the permittee is doing. It's typically, modification to the standard or based on a restoration plan that's been developed that says, we gave you this effluent limit, but we actually determined that it needs to be more stringent for us to be in compliance with the water quality standards.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Very good. Mr. Forest Service, any questions?
I don't have anything.
Okay. So at this point, we would ask that if there are any supporters in the room, in the audience, that wish to speak in support of this proposed rule change, they're welcome to come up and address the council at this time. Yes, please come up, introduce yourself, who you represent, and begin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Hearing Commissioner Cora, Mr. Cora, council members. First of all, I would like to say thank you to the division for the work that they've done on this rule. You've done a lot of work, a lot of outreach, and very much appreciated. So, and Mr. Cora, I'm not sure this is support, but just some options. It's not opposition, but just some suggestions for the council. Is this an appropriate time for that?
Well, you're here. Go ahead.
Okay. So I wasn't sure where it fit in.
Excuse me just a second.
Sure.
She needs to introduce herself.
Oh yes.
I missed that altogether. Yes, please introduce yourself and who you represent.
Sure. And I apologize for that. My name is Mary Flanderka. I'm with the Wyoming Outdoor Council, and I am sharing some comments from my colleague, Dan Heilig, who has been involved in this for quite some time. So the specific language that he is has suggestions about is Romanet II. It says, in the circumstances where the reevaluation concludes that a more stringent, highest attainable condition is justified necessary, the department shall modify the discharge permit accordingly. In circumstances where the reevaluation concludes that a more lenient, highest attainable condition is justified, a new variance must be developed. And his recommendation is that the word justified be replaced with attainable, and determining a condition that can be justified is not or not is a wholly subjective exercise that adds new and uncertain elements into the process. The word is not defined in the rule, and what appears to be justified to one person may appear to be unjustified to the other. On the other hand, the process for determining the condition that is attainable is a fundamental element of the variance rule. And the entire process from start to finish is built around making this key fact and science-based determination. So that's his first suggestion.
Okay, excuse me, Ms. Flanderka, I need to interrupt you. You may have said it and I did not hear it, but I need you to go back. You mentioned section Romanet I.
Double I, yes.
But what's the rest of the set? Is that an A or a B or a C? Can you tell me where?
I don't have that information. This is what he sent me.
That's just what he said.
I can tell you.
Okay.
Section 37.
I can tell you, it's 37, 8,
D.
Page
Romanet
128.
Okay, so a 37
8,
H is in Harry.
Yes.
H is in error, it's on top page 128.
HDII.
Right.
And it's on the very last page.
I-28.
Okay. Council members, are we all, without excuse the pun, are we on the same page?
And I apologize.
Hearing that they are, please proceed.
All right, great. Thank you.
Now you're going to go on to a separate suggestion here.
It's in the same paragraph, the same section. Second, he recommends that the second sentence be deleted as it contemplates the further lowering of water quality It is important to keep in mind the purpose of variances. They are designed to improve water quality by achieving incremental improvements in water quality, leading to eventual attainment of the ultimate designated use. 80 Federal Register 51020 and 510. Slow down. Sorry. Eventual attainment of the ultimate designated use. 80 Federal Register 51020 51035, August 21st, 2015. If the highest attainable condition expressed in a variance cannot be achieved, the proper response may be a compliance schedule rather than a further weakening of an interim water quality standard.
Okay. Is that it?
That is it. Thank you.
All right. Yeah,
Yes.
Okay. Yep, stay here. So, at this time, council members, any questions relative to what we just heard from the Wyoming Outdoor Council? None? No. Okay. As I understand it, if I had to briefly state it, you don't like the word justified.
Correct.
And you don't like the second sentence.
Correct.
Okay. Agents would now ask that, does the agency have any response to these two comments that you believe the council needs to hear?
So we, council, members of the council, we propose these changes based on EPA's comment. If you recall, during the presentation, I touched upon this. They wanted us to make it explicit that if we somehow had set the highest attainable condition as being too low, and during a reevaluation, it determined that we need to set the highest attainable condition higher. We're not changing the underlying standards. We just sort of missed the mark, I guess, would be, for lack of a better term, where, you know, sometimes a wastewater engineer might expect that a certain technology could achieve a particular effluent quality. It's possible when they constructed the plant, you know, maybe they weren't able to achieve that limit. And so there may be circumstances where, you know, we thought they could do better. And so then we would just go back and revise the variance. And so the rule is essentially telling the permittee and telling us if that's the circumstance, then we would need to go back and change the variance. So so that's specific to the second sentence. I think it clarifies for any of the entity what's required during a reevaluation. In terms of the word justified versus attainable, I think the term attainable, highest attainable condition comes from the federal regulations. I think a lot of it is subjective. You know, it's going to be based on what we determine, like with the cooperation of the permittee and the EPA, is potentially attainable by the permittee. And so I think the terms justified, attainable can be used synonymously in this context. I think we were concerned about having highest attainable condition and attainable, just like slightly redundant. And there's not a lot of other terms potentially you could use instead of those terms.
Any more? Mr. Frederick?
Members of the council, if I might, correct me if I'm wrong here, Lindsay, but I believe during the reevaluation process, there's a change made that we do go out for comment again. So there's certainly an obvious opportunity for further public scrutiny of what we're proposing. And if the question comes before us as to how the justification is made, we're certainly subject to responding accordingly.
Okay, very good. Any questions for, any follow-up from the council? Those on the phone? Hearing none, we'll, excuse me.
Dave Bagley?
Yes, Mr. Bagley.
So, if I'm looking at this, this is part of subsection 8. So it's during the reevaluation of a variance that's already been granted. A variance has been granted, it's got to be reevaluated at least every 5 years. During that reevaluation, the way it's currently written, basically 2 things could happen. The reevaluation can determine that a more stringent level is necessary, justified. I think that's the first word. Actually, might, but right. And then they would modify the permit accordingly. But they're also saying that, in that 5-year time, just what the second sentence says, is that, maybe the science has shown that the previous limit was too high. Now that limit has been made more lenient, but that would lead to having developed a new variant. Am I understanding that correctly?
Madam Council.
Yep.
Madam Chair. I think that's correct. Yeah, my interpretation. I don't know necessarily if it's science so much as maybe the technology, didn't achieve what we thought it could potentially achieve. We're not changing the underlying standards in that case. It's just the highest attainable condition, which is sort of a subset. You can think of as the water quality standards and the effluent limit that's based on that is what we want to get to. And then this highest attainable condition is sort of the interim. What can you do in the meantime as you're working towards that ultimate goal? So that's what we would potentially determine during the reevaluation. When maybe we set it too high, and so they would need to, or maybe we set it too low, and they can't actually achieve that. So hopefully, when we're developing the variance, we will include some kind of margin of safety so that doesn't happen. But it isn't a change to the underlying standards at all. It's mostly trying to determine what we think they can actually achieve.
Okay. Very good.
Okay, thanks.
I'm okay. You okay, Rich? All right. So with that, thank you, Ms. Flanderka. We will, I think, keep our list going here, and we have discussion towards the end. So again, the question was, is there anybody in the room that would like to come up and speak to the council in support of this rule? Seeing none, going once, twice, 3 times. Okay. Is there anyone in the room that would like to come up and speak in opposition to this proposed rule? Hearing and seeing none, council members, it appears that we are at that point of this particular proceeding that if you don't have any more questions for the division, what's the pleasure of the council? I think what we'd like to have is a motion to approve these rules. So moved by Mr. Agopian. Seconded by Mr. Flitner. So now we have a motion. Is there discussion on the motion?
Do you have the motion to approve the rules in the statement of principal reasons?
I can do that if you'd like.
That way I just have one motion.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Ruby. So if I may ask for somebody to amend that motion to also add not only approve the rules, but approve the statement of principal reasons.
Move an amendment as requested by.
Thank you. Very good. So that's where we're at. So now that is the motion. Okay. Discussion. Council. I just skipped voting on that motion. I hope you understand. If you'd like, I could go back to it.
Good one.
Okay. I see silence. Hey, and for those of you on the telephone, and let's go ahead and get back on proper track here. There was a motion to add to the original motion or amend the motion to include the statement of principal reasons. Do I have a second? All right, discussion. Okay, that motion's been approved. So now we're back on the full motion.
Now we get a vote.
You get to vote on the full motion. If you, is there any discussion on the full motion? Okay, we did have before us some comments and suggestions. Does the council want to entertain those on the phone? I hear
This
none.
is Dave Bagley. I appreciate the comment. As I look at it, I think the way the DEQ has tried to, balance the comments they got from the EPA, which is also sort of the question that the Wyoming Outdoor Council is looking at. I'm happy with how DEQ has written it.
Okay, thank you.
I would concur this is Rich Fair Service concur with Dr. Bagley.
All right, very good. So, council members, is there a call for the question?
Question.
Okay. Question's been called. The motion is for the council to approve these amendments to Chapter 1 of the Water Quality Rules and Regulations and the Statement of Principal Rights. We take a vote, and since this is my first hearing on the council, do we do a voice vote or a roll call vote? Roll call. Roll call vote. Okay, I will start with Mr. Agopian at the other end.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Aye.
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 Aye. Mr. Fairservice?
Aye.
Okay, Dr. Bagley?
Aye.
Okay, and the chair votes aye as well. So with that, those rules have been adopted by the council.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
The hearing on that is now, that part of our work today is now closed, and we're prepared now, council, you're ready to go on to their next rulemaking. Okay. Mr. Ruby, do I have to repeat this stuff again for this one?
Kathy, do you need the introduction? You're good? Okay.
Yeah, very good. All right, very good. So, there's a lot of water. They're leaving you, Mr. Frederick.
No, we're just switching.
Okay, very good.
We still have our attorneys. So
Yeah, okay. Oh, okay, very good. Then, at this point in time, I would invite the Water Quality Division to go ahead and present these proposed rule changes to Chapter 5.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the council. Joining me here is Mr. Bill Tillman. Bill is currently taking a new position within Water Quality Division and is now essentially supervising our involvement in the State Revolving Fund grants program, working with the Water Development Commission and the Office of State Lands and Investments and the State Loan and Investment Board. So we're real pleased to have Bill step up and assume additional responsibilities. Prior to that, Bill had been involved in working very closely with respect to updating some of the division's rules and regulations, specifically as they relate to public drinking water supply systems, municipal wastewater treatment systems, and coincidentally, in concert with those two, also revisiting our regulations that govern the requirements for the certification of operators who operate public drinking water supply systems and municipal wastewater disposal systems. These are essentially the treatment plants for drinking water and wastewater systems. It's been some time since we had revisited the operator certification regulations, and we felt it was time in our general review of Water Quality Division regulations over the past few years to take another look at the OpCert regulations, recognizing that there have been some advancements and some changes in testing, expectations for certified operators, and so forth. So with that, I'll leave it to Bill to kind of cover a little bit for you, a little bit more closely, some of the changes that we're proposing in the update to the regulations.
Councilmember Cora, as Mr. Frederick had alluded to, some of the changes that we've made to Chapter 5 specifically were to address some of the things that we've come across in the last few years of operating this, of having this chapter in place. Some of those modifications are concern the requirements for operator availability. We've added a couple of certification levels for some of our simpler water systems, which actually cover the majority of our state, both on the water and wastewater side. We've added the responsibility of the facility to basically designate who the backup responsible charge operator is. And we also removed some grace period that was given to facilities when they, terminated their responsible charge employee. So I would like to go over just some of the changes that were going through some of the sections of the chapter in summary. In section 3, where we have definitions, we've added some language where we had cross references for definitions that were already available in the Wyoming Environmental Quality Act. Those definitions that were duplicated in our chapter, those were removed. We also removed the definition of available, as that's going to now be a requirement that's further designated in the chapter in a different section. So we removed that definition. We added the definition of lagoon system and well system, as that pertains to the 2 new certifications that we're adding to the certification levels that I mentioned before that address the majority of the systems in the state. In section 5, we basically just added to the list of the certification levels that we have listed on lines 149 through 151, where we added the well system certification and the lagoon system certification. In section 6, where we mentioned all the different levels of operator certification, there was basically just reorganized and streamlined. We had a lot of duplication, some reiteration of standards, so we basically just cleaned that section up. We did add a section D to that because for whatever reason, Wyoming is one of the few states that does not charge for operator license certification. And we get quite a few inquiries from around the country, basically trying to get certification in Wyoming without really any interest in actually working here, but just kind of to pad their resume, so to speak. So to avoid additional workload on the division, we've put the requirement in there that you need to be basically a resident or working in the state to receive certification for operator certification. In sections 7 and 8, basically those 2 sections were just edited to clarify the statements there and to add formatting consistency. In section 9, where we address operator responsibilities, this is where we further define and clarify what we mean by operator availability. And basically on lines 418, section 9B, Roman I and double I, we specifically have the criteria where we call out what we mean by availability. Before, in the previous promulgation of the rule, it was somewhat loosely defined as what available meant, and we ran into some issues where some folks were calling themselves available, but could be essentially on the other side of the country, where they couldn't actually respond to their facility or actually go out there to see what their problems were. So we felt like we needed to tighten up those conditions of availability. Part C, where we added there on line 425, we just added that just to reiterate to the operators that it's their responsibility to make sure that their employment history and that their employment record is current, because that's what's used for certifications and that we have in our database. So it's their responsibility basically to make sure that that information is up to date rather than the facility keeping that information current. Section 10 of the chapter was basically just edited for formatting consistency. In section 11, again, formatting consistency was corrected there, but also conditions D and E were removed because those 2 were for the previous promulgation of this rule, and they are no longer applicable to the rule as it stands. In section 12, where we address continuing education, the organization that puts together our exams, our certification exams, They just redid their, reviewed their, the exams that we have, and they removed the federal and state regulatory questions that were in the exam. And so to address that, rather than have that in the rule, we decided that that would be better served if we had that as part of the continuing education requirements for the operators. And so that's addressed in Section 12, Part B, or excuse me, yes, Part B, or Condition B. In Section 13, again, there was just some vagueness that was removed there as far as what was needed for auditing of our operator certification, operator certifications. Typically, annually, we for those that renew their licenses, we audit just to make sure that the training and stuff that we require, that this has been met. In Section 14, again, we clarified the requirements for reciprocity and removed any redundant statements that were there. And again, just for clarity on what we require for reciprocal licenses. In Section 15 were some fairly significant changes there, where we added the requirement for the for them to designate who the substitute responsible charge operator is. Previously, the facility was required to have a substitute responsible charge, but it did not have to be designated. And we ran into some issues where we could not find the responsible charge operator, and we didn't know who the substitute was. So we felt like that was a necessary change to help us. In addition to that, on Section A-II, we reiterated what it means to be available for the facility owners, so that they also understand what we require for availability of responsible charge operators. In Section B, or excuse me, in Condition B of that same section, is where we previously had a grace period of 45 days, where if a responsible charge operator was terminated, the facility had roughly 45 days to replace him, which kind of left the operation of the facility somewhat in question. And we felt like that needed to be changed to where if they terminate that employee, that position needs to immediately be refilled, just to maintain human health and protect the environment. Also, in Part H of that section, we added in the responsibilities of the facility owners that occasionally when you have, in some municipalities, when you have elections and new mayors or people that are in charge of the water or wastewater plants are in charge, they feel like they know better how to run that system and don't necessarily have the adequately trained people running the system. And as a means of maybe saving money, that, well, if we don't necessarily have to add all this stuff, again, we could help ourselves out. And we wanted to prevent that from happening again, basically for making sure that they're required to have certified operators running that facility. In Section 16, we basically gave the administrator flexibility and better discretion as when it came to suspension or possible revocation of an operator's certification. Before, it was a little bit more limited, and we felt like our administrator needed to have a little bit better discretion when it came to those instances. Fortunately, we've not had to go there, but just to add that flexibility we felt was important. Section 17 was, again, corrected for formatting and grammar inconsistencies. In Section 18, we added a condition there, AI, and that was basically for those renewing their certifications, we have to have a cutoff of the end of the business day of the 31st as when they need to put in their request for certification. We've had instances where those operators were renewing their license, wanted to get certification. They felt like we should be here at 5 minutes to midnight to accommodate their request. And we just wanted to make sure that it was in rule that where that requirement was and what the time limit for their certification had to be. The other change that we made was in Section 19, where basically those the conditions there were applicable to the previous promulgation of the rule, and they're no longer applicable. So we decided that they needed to be deleted. Those are the changes that we've made to the chapter. Minor, considered, but somewhat necessary. We did not have many comments. We only had one comment during the comment period that we had open, and it was from Karen Heath, and basically, I think you've had this comment. She said that there was basically some confusion when she was looking at what her requirements were for testing for her certification level for her facility. She felt like the website was somewhat confusing as far as giving conflicting information. And we've taken a look at that, and we will definitely make modifications to our website to address that. There were some wording changes that were there that we could see where there could be some confusion, and we will address that after this meeting in the next few weeks to clarify that confusion. Any questions from the council?
Council members, any questions for the division? Ms. Lally.
And I'm mostly addressing small towns because that's what I'm familiar with. If an employee is hired by a municipality and they're working on getting their certifications and working on their training, don't have 6 months experience, are they still going to be able to qualify under the new standards where you have to have 6 months experience before you can get a license?
Yes, they will.
Okay. And then the second is the new standard where you have to refill that position immediately. How does that work if you live in, say, Bags or Grable, where, it's hard to find employees in a time, really fast because you have to find somebody that's willing to live in the middle of nowhere.
Understood. Councilmember, or Chairman Lawley. Basically, if they're following our chapter as far as it's written, they would have a responsible charge operator and a substitute responsible charge operator. And if the situation came about where the responsible charge operator was terminated for whatever reason, we would think that the substitute responsible charge would be moved into that responsible charge position immediately, and then they have time basically to refill that substitute responsible charge operator. So we think that if they're in compliance with the rule, they would have the employees there to make that change to accommodate that position. If not, we do have on our website availability of contract operators, a list of contract operators throughout the state to where they could go there also and see if there's someone that's in the nearby neighborhood that could also fill that position if by chance the substitute responsible charge for whatever reason also left town. Okay,
so there is a method to get at least somebody temporarily until they can hire an employee. There's a method to find somebody.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that was my question.
Okay, Mr. Fair's service, Dr. Bagley, any questions for the division? Who did? Okay. Okay. Well, while we're there, maybe the chair could, the hearing officer could ask his question. In section 15, excuse me, section 15A, little I. I'll read it. The owners, and I just want to get a little clarification on this. Owners shall ensure that either the responsible charge operator or the substitute responsible charge operator is capable of being on site within 8 hours and shall initiate the appropriate operational and technical actions within 1 hour of being notified that there is a problem at the facility. So, I think based on your conversation, that's workable because there's a substitute operator always, right?
Right. And
so, but it's really 9 hours. I mean, if somebody is notified of a problem, I guess the operator's there and he gets 1 hour to fix it.
Basically,
say more about that anyway, would you, Bill, please?
Yes. Chairman Cora, or excuse me, Councilmember Cora. Basically, what the intent is that, let's say their responsible charge operator for some reason has business elsewhere in the state. They're from Jackson area and they're down here for some reason. We feel that if they got a call that there's a problem at that facility, immediately they could call and give whoever the operator is on shift some instruction as to what they need to do to kind of start to fix the problem.
I got it.
And we felt like if they're here, it's roughly 6 hours or so to get to Jackson. So that would give them hopefully adequate time, not in the middle of a wintertime blizzard, to make it back to their facility to address changes or address the problem if need be.
Okay, thank you.
That was the
I
intent.
understand. All right. Did we have somebody back on the line?
Liaison Rich is coming back.
Okay. For everybody, I just wait a few moments to see if we get our last member back on the line. Are we making any progress, Joe?
Not yet.
Well, pardon?
Liaison.
Okay.
Rich should be any second.
Yeah, well, I think Rich did speak, and he had no questions, if I'm not mistaken, before he dropped off. But, hey, Dr. Bagley, do you have any questions for the division on these rules before we go to public comment? Hearing none, council, Joe, are they theoretically there anymore?
I see both of them.
All right. So, Mr. Fair Service, Mr. Bagley, on our end, we show that you were on the line. Who just spoke, please? Who is that?
That was Rich.
Yes. And Rich, you have no more questions? Is that what I heard? I think I heard that. So now we're going to go to Mr. Bagley. Mr. Bagley, are you there? I would like to, sorry, with the council, move forward with the next part of this thing. And the two members that are on the phone certainly have the leeway to ask any questions they want of the division throughout the rest of this hearing. So without any protestations from the council, I'm going to go ahead and ask if there's anybody from the public in the audience that would like to come up and testify to the council in support of these rules. And by the way, our standard is to do support, opposition, and then neutral. So if you were here for the last conversation, Ms. Flanderka would have been at the end instead of where she was. So anyway, in support, anyone that wishes to come up and make a comment in support of the rules. Seeing none, is there anybody here that wishes to come up and make comments in opposition to the rule? Seeing none, is there anybody here that would like to come up and speak in a neutral manner about these rules? Okay, I see none. So, Mr. Tillman, you evidently have done a pretty good job of getting this where everybody is in agreement. So, council members, let me just pause for another moment to see if we can get these two phone participants on. Are we having any? Are they there?
Rich is there. He's muted us. Peter.
Pardon me?
Rich is there. David is
somewhere.
unknown.
Okay, hey, Richard, just to make sure we have good connection, can you hear me? I cannot hear you.
You need to turn it up.
I can hear it. He said yes, he can hear you.
Okay. All right. Richard, can just if you would just speak up, say something. How's the weather there in Arizona? Okay, very good. All right. So, council members, is that okay with you?
Yep.
On Mr. Fair Service. Okay, Dr. Lawley,
Dr. Bagley.
Bagley, I'm sorry.
Oh, I went to a lot of school.
I apologize.
I can hear you again now. Hear me?
Very good. Yes, we can. Okay, so we have just to catch you guys up. There was no testimony from the public, either for, against, or neutral. So we are now at that stage of this proceeding where we need a motion to promulgate the proposed changes to Chapter 5. Is there a motion? Been moved by Mr. Flinders, second.
And the principal reasons.
And the principal reasons. Excuse me.
Second.
And so it's a motion to approve the rules and the principal reasons. It was seconded by Mr. Agopian. All right, any discussion, council? Seeing none,
Dave.
yeah. Mr. Fairservice, any comments in discussion about the rule and the motion?
Oh, I don't. I'm patiently listening.
Okay. Dr. Bagley?
No comments for me.
Okay. Seeing that there are no comments, I would ask for the question to be called.
Question.
Question has been called to promulgate these rules and regulations and the principal reasons. We'll have a vote. Starting down at that end, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Those on the phone? Mr.
Aye. This is Rich.
And Richard's aye.
Aye. Dave.
Okay. Very good. So the motion has been passed unanimously by, and I vote aye. Excuse me. The motion has been passed unanimously by the council. Congratulations, Division. You have some new rules.
Thank you.
So we are now. That concludes the portion of this portion of our meeting. I would. Do I need a motion? So with that, I would ask Madam Chair to relieve me of this burden and take control of the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Cora. I think, based on the time, we will do a little bit of council business and then have the hearing for, good bit night, or the legal advice and the new thing, after lunch. So,
Madam Chair,
yes,
maybe we ought to ask Mr. Parker, do you have to be back over there? I mean, I know you're kind of on a schedule. Would it be easier if we get the good hearing right now? Surely it should take a few minutes. Then, I mean, I hate to tie you up and bring you back over here. I know you guys with the DQ have hoops to jump through over there too. So I would like to tie you in a couple of hours.
oh, I didn't realize Director Parfit was here for that. Sorry.
I assume you.
So, Madam Chair, I hadn't intended to be here for that.
Okay.
I certainly can be.
No, that's okay. Okay. I just don't want to put you out either. So, why don't we go ahead and approve our minutes? Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from December 5th and 6th?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, and now I need a motion to approve the minutes from December 15th.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
What? Think we should do them all at once?
Yes.
Okay. I was gonna say, I think minutes.
I
have
make
to
a
be-
motion to approve the minutes from December 15, 2017, January 5th, 2018, and January 16, 2018.
I believe minutes have to be approved separately.
Oh, do that?
I think so. That's my understanding. I don't know. Can we do them all together?
Yeah,
Okay.
I believe you can do them all together, and if somebody wants to make a change to it, as long as they're specifying what
Okay.
date, but I would, you can do them either way, but you can do them all together.
Okay. Well,
We've
then,
already approved
December
the
5th.
5th and 6th.
Okay, and Nick's now made for the rest of the times. So is there a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Madam Chair, can we do the consent agenda?
That's what I was about to do. I would now.
I like this new agenda here where we don't have.
Yeah.
I would now accept a motion to approve the administrative order on consent in docket 18-5901.
Which one is that?
Let me get back to the agenda.
It's an amendment.
Amendment to the town of Wheatland, regarding a cease and transfer, for their solid waste facility, right? So is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor, or does this need to be roll call?
Roll call, yes.
Okay. Nick?
Aye.
Tim?
Aye.
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 And Dave?
Aye.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, or it's been approved. And then pursuant to Chapter 1, Section 16A of the DEQ General Rules of Practice and Procedure, each member of the council on an annual basis must make a public declaration that they do or do not derive a significant portion of their income from persons subject to air quality permits or enforcement orders, and that they do or do not have a potential conflict of interest. Mr. Footner?
Right, I don't have any conflict.
Mr. Fairservice?
Do not have a conflict.
Dr. Bagley?
Well, I work for the University of Wyoming. Air permits, I don't see that I have a conflict of interest, but I publicly declare that, I work for an organization that may have permits.
Didn't we already sign this?
It's a yearly, just like the coal rules. Mr. Gopian? We can come back.
Yeah. Forget what I think I signed it last year, but I don't have a conflict.
Yes.
We,
Can't sit.
okay, well, if you don't have a conflict, you just have to declare that you don't have a conflict.
I don't do that.
Ms. Balmer?
I do not have.
Mr. Cora?
Madam Chair, I do consult for some people in the soda ash industry that do have air permits. So I would, depending on the subject, it could have a potential conflict of interest.
Okay, thank you. And I do not have a conflict.
Yeah, I don't recall from last year, and I got it. Yeah, I work for an oil and gas company that receives air quality permits, not conflicted from working on air quality rules. Sitting as a hearing examiner on the council, and the event that one of these permits is challenged.
Right. We just have, we just, this was an EPA requirement, right?
That's fine. Well, was this discussed with our attorney general on the?
Yep,
I think we,
a year ago.
Prior to the meeting today.
No.
it was,
And I don't know, it says, Jim here says pursuant to chapter 1, section 16. Is that section, I'm just trying to, it says chapter 1, section 16A of the general rules of practice and procedure. So I can just look at this, but I don't, is it, I don't know, I'm having a hard time finding section 16A of chapter 1, but maybe it's the wrong rules. I just want to give it in front of Nick because I want to look at the rule too.
it was on the agenda. Yeah.
It's what we used last year. It was fine last year unless they brought an amendment to us.
is it chapter one of the? It's probably there. I'm just looking at the wrong place.
Ryan, we changed the rules of practice and procedure in the last year, so the section might have changed in those rules.
Would it be chapter
It's
one,
probably
you
gonna
think,
be
still?
chapter 1 still, but I think it might be a different section.
Okay. Section 7. Section 7. Is it quality?
It is, but this isn't.
I mean, I have no problem with the board as long as they know, but board members may have certain questions on it. And I'm just looking at this for the first time, and I want to, it's a different section than what's on the document. And if they change the rules, I just want to make sure that the board members know and that I know. And it sounds like other board members are sure, but I want to make sure that Councilmember Cora and Agopian.
It's chapter 1 of the practice procedure, section
7.
It is A, Romanet 1. And Romanet 2.
Here's my question. Jim, does it need, I know it looks like, what, 5 of the board members or the council members have stated it. I don't know if Councilmember Agopian and Cora may have a question, because it does say, the members of the council shall disclose any potential conflicts of interest in a public meeting of the council as required by the Clean Air Act, and it cites some federal code. I don't have that in front of me. I don't know what a potential conflict of interest is defined as, so.
They define it as a significant, just same as WIPD's, a significant portion of their income is derived from a company that has an air quality permit or is subject to notice of violation.
Do the council members, or does Councilmember Cora and Gopian know what a significant portion is? Again, I don't have that in front of me, so.
Last year, we used the 10%, just like in the WIPD's permit, and the 50% that's in the CFR for water quality WIPD's permits for those that are retired.
So if
I think the declaration, if I recall last year, was just an acknowledgement that my salary is paid from the company subject to that holds air quality permits and is subject to notice of violation.
Yes.
I'm not conflicting myself out.
No, there's no conflict.
Okay, perfect.
Then we're good.
It's not, you're not, unlike WIPD's, you're not forced out.
Okay,
It's just the public declaration that I may have a issue.
all right.
Thanks for the clarification.
Okay, well then let's adjourn until 12 o'clock. Or, I mean, 1 o'clock, I'm sorry. Till 1 o'clock for lunch, and we will return at 1 o'clock and address Good Bit Night and then Black Hills Bit Night.
Thank you. Hey, all right.